You're listening to the Cultured Bumpkin, a literature podcast with Jake Phillips, where we present audiobook quality readings of the classics for your enjoyment. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, just because you're a bumpkin doesn't mean you can't be cultured. Welcome to the Cultured Bumpkin, and today we have guest J.D. Sutter. And J.D.'s a good friend of mine that I've never actually met in person. So we have a lot in common with, we have some, voice acting type of stuff that we've done. We've been parts of the same thing, I think, in the past. I knew all about you for probably way before you knew I existed, because I've listened to both your podcasts, your ATC podcast, which we'll get into, and your poetry podcast, which we'll get into as well. But man, JD, thank you for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Good deal. Well, what I like to do, because I don't have guests on every episode, it's kind of rare actually. Only if I find the the greatest specimens do I bring them on my show. You know what I mean? So what I like to do is, literature is sort of it brings a lot of people together from, all kind of political, religious, whatever backgrounds, and I really like that. It's one thing I love about literature is you can sort of gather around and enjoy something together. So what I like to do is, before we talk about audio dramas and stuff like that, I would love to hear a little about you, and then, kind of get into some classic literature favorites and stuff like that.
Great.
So tell us, just whatever, in 30 seconds, tell us about JD.
Well, I live in the Valley of the Sun, Phoenix, Arizona.
Nice.
And I've been here for, nearly 20 years, I think. And I obviously enjoy reading. That's probably why I'm here. But right. I also enjoy camping a lot. I like the outdoors. I'm not so much a hunter, fisherman kind of guy, but I do love just being out in nature. And so I love the outdoors, camping, and it's been a little while since I've gone, but I do love it. And when I'm out camping, one thing that I do really enjoy also is geocaching, which is a lot of fun too.
And what is that?
So geocaching is sort of like an online treasure hunt kind of thing. You use GPS coordinates to locate these buried treasures, so to speak. And there's all different sizes of them, and they're hidden all over the world. And there's nothing like super expensive in them, but they're just little trinkets little collectible things and stuff like that in them. But it's just all about the fun of the game, and every one of them has a logbook that you get to sign, and then you can also sign the digital one and track how many caches you've found and stuff. It's a lot of fun.
That's interesting. I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, it's a great game.
Did you do hiking? Have you hiked anywhere else before you were in Arizona, or did you sort of gain the love of it once you got there?
Well, I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest, and so I used to do a lot of hiking and camping up there as well.
Okay, so what's the difference in a Pacific Northwest camp and a Great Desert camp?
Well, here in Arizona, I don't usually go camping down here in the Phoenix area. It's just too hot. So when I go camping, I'm going to go up north into, the not too far up into like the Grand Canyon area, but Prescott area. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Sedona, all of those areas up there. I've camped in all of those regions, and it's a little bit cooler. There's some lakes up there, and so it's not quite as deserty as it is down here in the valley. Okay. But the difference is obviously the climate's different from here in the Northwest, but obviously there are evergreen trees up there, which we don't really have all that much down here.
Okay.
And then the other difference would be the insects. I mean, down here we've got scorpions and tarantulas that are wandering around. I remember one time we were camping up in the Prescott area, and there was just this massive tarantula right outside of our tent. I mean, it was as big as my hand. So we didn't encounter those up in Oregon.
Okay, that's Oregon, interesting. Washington. That's interesting. I've never been in the now I've camped with the Army, and that's not real camping, in the Mojave Desert, but I've never been into Arizona or that kind of thing. So that's, I don't know, that's very interesting. That's something I want to do. It's sort of, that sounds intriguing. And yeah, so can you tell us a little about your areas of expertise? And you know what I'm talking about as far as, especially with audio drama and things like that. But like, what are your areas of expertise?
Well, I've been a podcaster and a new media consultant for over 15 years now. And it was kind of because of that I ended up getting into the audio drama world as an audio drama critic. And I've been doing that for over 12 years. So that's kind of where my focuses are these days. I also do voiceover work, as you mentioned earlier. And so in terms of new media, I mean, I work with clients to do post-production on their podcasts, or I also do coaching sessions with them to help them develop a good show. And my ongoing clients that I do editing for, I also, usually every episode that I edit, I have notes for them. Hey, let's tweak this a little bit, going over ways to improve their presentation and that kind of stuff. So I really enjoy doing that, but I also do that just one-off for people. They can hire me to do that or do a review of their show and give them pointers on how to improve and things like that. So it's a lot of fun.
Interesting. Okay. Good deal. So we'll go into the especially the audio drama critic part in a minute, but as far as poetry, classic literature, what are some favorites? How did you develop an interest? Because not everybody's interested in the classics and things like that. How did that go?
My love of poetry first started back in high school in a literature class. And even as a very young kid, I started reading, older level books pretty young. But I got into the classics when I was probably like 8 or 9 by reading like the illustrated classics, which I don't think those necessarily count as actually reading the book, but back then that was kind of the gateway into those classic works. And I think that's the same for a lot of people who move on to actually reading the full works later on. But that was kind of my introduction to the classics. And then in high school, we'd had a literature class where we started studying poetry, and our assignments were we had to memorize a certain number of poems over the course of that school year. And one of the poems was Chartless by Emily Dickinson. And I just was struck by the simplicity of it, but yet the profoundness of that little short piece, and it was beautiful. And then another one we had to learn was If by Rudyard Kipling, which is a very well-known piece. And that one stuck with me for years and years and years. And, there were a few others that we studied that year, but that is what really started my desire to learn more about poetry. But it's really been in the last probably 10 years that I've really gotten into it much more. But yeah, there's just something about the cadence and the meter, and just when when you paint a beautiful picture with words in that way, in the rhyme, it's just beautiful, and I love it. I just when there's a piece that just speaks to you, it just I don't know. There's just something about it. I don't even know how to put it into words, but
that's great. That's how I describe it as well. It's just kind of like, I just like it.
Yeah, and Dickinson in particular, like there's something about her mastery of the language where she could say so much with so few words.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't find that very often, just because you have a huge vocabulary and the definitions of a 5-10 syllable word or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean anything if you don't know how to put those all together. And she was a master at it. I mean, goodness, I think 1,800 poems she wrote. I haven't even scratched the surface of everything that she's written, but Just a master.
That's great. So I'm assuming that Emily Dickinson's one of your favorites. What would you say? I don't know. Do you have any, kind of, what's your top three, something like that?
Well, she's definitely in the mix. Longfellow, I really, really like. I know you do too. You've covered a lot of his pieces on your show. Let's see here. I also like finding some of those poets that you may not really know very well.
Right.
And like a lot of people don't know that Abraham Lincoln wrote a handful of poems. Some of them are very short, and some of them they're kind of jokey. They were a couple of them were written when he was quite young, but I like finding those little ones where wow, I didn't know that, and they're really good. Another one that I found a few years ago is Mary Leeper. You hear about Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Emily Dickinson and some of these others that are very well known, and a lot of people know their name. Just they may not know their works, but they know the name, they recognize it. But some of these others, I find sometimes their works are just as good.
Right. That's interesting. I really like that as well. On my podcast, I try to have a lot of stuff like, let's say, a well-known author, but maybe a not so well-known short story or essay.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like Mark Twain is kind of a favorite short story writer of mine. He has tons of stories that a lot of people have never heard of.
Right.
And so I like that, like good writing, whether or not the person is well-known. It's like, that's really cool.
Finding those little gems out there, I mean, I love Robert Louis Stevenson. He wrote a lot of poems, and a lot of them were aimed at children, but I find them so charming. They're really great. Walt Whitman, Tennyson. I really like Tennyson. So yeah, there's so many great ones out there.
That's cool. I think we have very similar tastes in poetry. I like that. Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you were an audio drama critic. And what does that mean?
Well, it means that I listen to hundreds of hours of audio drama every year, and I will write or do spoken reviews on our podcast and website, audiotheatercentral.com. And we talk about family-friendly audio drama, and, we'll go over the points that we thought were really good, sometimes point out some things that we think could have been improved, but really just diving into the kind of the nitty gritty, getting a little nerdy about audio drama and some of the behind the scenes, and, just kind of picking it apart and looking at the different elements. And it's grown to be a huge thing. I mean, when I first started, it was never intended to, well, I guess I get it. That's not true. I did intend for it to get out to a larger audience, but it wasn't like I expected it to get to the point that it is now. Like now we've ran the industry awards for 5 years now, and
Right.
So it's gotten pretty well known in the industry, and I've been able to speak at some conferences and do some lectures at universities about audio drama, and so it's a lot of fun too. I mean, I really love the medium of audio drama, and so my goal is to bring more awareness to what is happening in this space, and then also encourage the creators in the space, and thirdly, to bring more young creators in and help them get to the same level of quality of what is being done today.
Right. That's awesome. So for someone that is kind of unfamiliar with audio drama, so a lot of listeners listen to podcasts, obviously, and a lot of them are Audible listeners,
Mm-hmm.
so, which is, of course, it's just a one-man or one-woman show a lot of the time, just no nothing. Just the voice. What is different about an audio drama, and what do you think are like good elements to an audio drama?
So audio drama is a full cast audio production with sound design and music. And so all of those elements come together to create an immersive audio story. It's basically like a movie for your ears. So it's a step up, I guess, from an audiobook, although there are full cast audiobooks as well. And in fact, I've done work on several different titles that are full cast. So you have multiple actors for the different characters in the book. But this is a little bit different. It's a step up. You've got all of these other elements. And so what's so cool about audio drama is that it really incites the imagination, because you're not just hearing somebody read, but you're hearing these performances from, great actors like yourself who bring these characters to life. And because you just have that audio, you really become an active participant in creating the story. And audio content in general engages the human brain in a unique way from visual entertainment. And so there's just something that's more intimate and engaging about, something going right into your ear. And there's just something that in our brains that are drawn to that. And so when a story is brought to life in this way, and you've got all of these elements, it's so engaging, and it's amazing. And there's plenty of classic literature works that have been adapted into this medium. And so there's just something about it that I just absolutely love. And so I've just been working to try to, get the word out about this, because there's just and the other thing is it's more portable. I mean, you can't sit and watch a video as you're driving down the road, but you can listen to an audio drama. Or,
right.
And your listeners know, you can do the same with an audiobook. You out mowing the lawn or this time of year, shoveling the snow or whatever, you can listen to something. And so there's just something so cool about it. And you asked, what makes a good one? Well, I have this little thing that I teach that I call the 4 pillars of audio drama. And at first it might sound, a little bit obvious, but there are different elements under these 4 pillars, and they are the script, the performance, the sound design, and the music. And when all of these things mesh and merge together in a cohesive whole, that just is a perfect audio drama. You can just take any piece of music, a piece of, speaking of classics, you take a piece of Beethoven or Bach or whatever and put that in a story, but it's not the same as when you have a composer who's familiar with what is going on in this scene, and they sit down and they write a piece that is made custom for what is happening in this scene, just like, composers do for great films. But with audio, all of these things, they could fight with each other if not done properly. If you have the music, you got sound effects going on, and then you've got the voices. If it's not done well, it just will sound like chaos. And so that's the mark of a high quality audio drama, is when all of these elements just come together, they merge into this one cohesive story that just pulls you in and immerses you in this story world.
That's awesome. Okay, so let's say someone that's listening says, man, I've never even heard of audio dramas, and JD makes it sound very enticing. I want to listen to one. What would you advise them to do? What are some recommendations?
Well, because this is a safe space for literature nerds here, so I'm going to throw out some classic literature adaptations for you.
Okay.
So you can make an audio drama about anything, obviously, but there are some just amazing pieces of classic literature that have been adapted. One of my favorites is Oliver Twist by Focus on the Family Radio Theater. Of course, this is by Charles Dickens. And this is this is like top tier audio drama. It's one of the best audio dramas ever made, in my opinion. The actors, their performances were just stellar, like top notch. The music was amazing. The sound design was just beautiful soundscapes that put you in the scene. It's absolutely amazing. So I would highly recommend that one. Ben-Hur, also by Focus on the Family Radio Theater. Another, well-known piece of classic literature, but just amazing. If anybody's familiar with the story, the chariot race scene is one of the best action scenes in all of audio drama. It's just amazing. And Heirloom Audio, they produced an adaptation of a G.A. Henty novel several years ago called In Freedom's Cause, which is the amazing story of William Wallace. And that is a super, super well done audio drama as well. And then in recent years, Oasis Audio did an adaptation of Frankenstein, which blew me away. It was amazing. So I would highly recommend those. Oh, let me throw in one more. Okay. BBC Radio, they did David Copperfield a few years ago, and it is just fantastic as well.
Interesting. Good deal. I'm actually listening to a BBC Radio adaptation of the Jane Austen novels. Mm-hmm. And they're, have, David Tennant and Benedict Cumberbatch and stuff like that. I'm really enjoying them. And, so that's fantastic. Appreciate those recommendations. Now, what have you been a part of? You mentioned voice acting and other stuff. What are there any that you could recommend? Maybe that, maybe it's not classic literature themed, but it's just any good story. Do you have any recommendations there?
So I've been an actor in several series. I've been in a show called Pirateers, Shadows and Daylight, which is kind of a mystery thriller show. I played a recurring character in season 1, and I can't spill the beans yet on any of the specifics, but I will be showing up in season 2 of that show as well, voicing some different characters. I've also been in a bit of Time Travel, which is a great sci-fi anthology, or I guess it's more of a time travel anthology show. They're not super science fiction-y, but time travel is sort of science fiction-y, but it's a great show. And then Witnesses, which is a biblical audio drama where they tell stories of people from Scripture who had a firsthand encounter with Jesus. So I've been in that show, and then I produce and play one of the main characters in Greenhorn Tales, which is a short form comedy show. So I've been in a lot of audio dramas, but I've also directed and produced a lot of them for the Audio Drama Alliance and for Porchlight Family Media, which is my company. So I've been involved in pretty much every aspect. I don't really do sound design. That's not my forte, but I've done voice track editing. I've, like I said, directed and produced and written a little bit. So I've got my hands in all of it.
Right. That's awesome. I didn't realize that you directed and stuff too. That's incredible. So before we get into your asking about how to connect with you and how to find your work and work with you, all that kind of stuff, let's get back to poetry. So can you? We'd love to hear you read. Can you introduce your poem and read it for us?
Sure, yeah. So as I said earlier, I do like to try to find pieces that are not super familiar, and this is one that I've had on my list to consider for my poetry program, but we just haven't gotten to it, and so I thought, well, you know what, this might be a really good one. And I don't really know much about this poet. Her name is Irene Thompson. All that I was able to find is that she's a 19th century English poet, and there's not much out there. I couldn't even find very many poems by her, but she's probably best known for people that have heard of her by the two poems that are kind of paired together One is the town child and one is the country child. And they kind of explore the contrasts of living in these two different places and kind of the human tendency to be dissatisfied with where you are and always looking at, the grass is always greener on the other side kind of thing. So those are great pieces. But what I found was one called Rainy Nights. And it's perhaps a bit juvenile, but I really liked it, the imagery in it. And so I thought I would share Rainy Nights by Irene Thompson.
Okay, that's great. I can't wait to hear. I'm completely unfamiliar. So this is exciting because I hear somebody new and hear new work. I love being introduced. So yes, do continue.
All right. Rainy Nights goes like this. I like the town on rainy nights when everything is wet, when all the town has magic lights and streets of shining jet, when all the rain about the town is like a looking glass, and all the lights are upside down below me as I pass. In all the pools are velvet skies, and down the dazzling street a fairy city gleams and lies in beauty at my feet. Isn't it beautiful?
That's beautiful. I love that. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to have heard that and to have a new author to explore. Of course, I know apparently there's not a ton out there, but that's great. I appreciate that. That was wonderful.
There's a whimsy to it that I just love, and you can picture it as you're walking down the street and you see those lights. And I'm one who also loves rain. I mean, I said I'm from the Northwest, so we had a lot of it up there, and so
right.
I don't know. There was just something about it that I could absolutely picture this entire scene in my brain, and I just loved it. It's beautiful.
Yes, I agree. That is wonderful. So thank you very much for reading that and sharing your time with us, telling us about audio drama and whatnot. And I would love, in closing, to hear about Porchlight FM, how people can listen, how they can contact you, hear more of your work, whatever.
Sure. So Porchlight Family Media is my company. We're an audio production company. We create podcasts, like I mentioned earlier, Audio Theater Central, Bookworm Banquet, which is our author interview and book review show, which is sort of on hiatus right now, but my co-host and I dive into bookwormy topics, and it's a lot of fun. So that one's available. And then you referenced our poetry program, Verses in Vox, which is sort of like a merging of audio drama and classic poetry. So we'll take these classic, beautiful pieces of poetry, get a wonderful narrator to do a dramatic reading, and then we send that over to a composer, and then they will write original score to that narration, and then we'll drop in little bits of sound design here and there to sort of enhance it. It's not a full soundscape, but just little audio punctuation points throughout the piece. And so that's a lot of fun. And then we have a radio station where we play 24/7 Christian music, and we've got a few other audio-related projects, but that's all over at porchlightfamilymedia.com. So links to everything that I've mentioned are all available right there. And then for me personally, my website's jdsutter.me. So if you're wanting to connect with me, I would be happy to do that.
Good deal. And then you had mentioned, tell us about the ATC as well. A lot of people will have heard of a lot of the stuff that you mentioned earlier, but tell us how to connect with ATC.
So audiotheatercentral.com, and it's all about exploring the audio drama industry through news, reviews, and interviews with cast and crew. And if you're interested in learning about what's available out there to listen to, we've got all the major producers are linked on there. We've probably talked about them at some point in our back catalog. So, that's all available, and it's fun to get behind the scenes and talk with the people that make this great content. And so that's where the interviews come in. So we'll do interviews with the people that work on these shows in any capacity. And so that's always a lot of fun. So that's at audiotheatercentral.com. And there's, the podcast, which is monthly, but then we're posting to the blog there on a regular basis in between podcast episodes.
Good deal. And as a caveat to that, if you have noticed, you, the listener, has noticed any of my pieces that have music or an ambiance, walking by the cricket pond or whatever, that is because of JD and his Verses in Vox. I started listening to that. I was like, I like the way that sounds. It's not just an audiobook style, but there's some extra like things to spark your imagination. So that is where I got that. So thank you for that idea, JD.
Well, I'll tell you how that started was, it goes back to that literature class that I told you about earlier. And really? I fell in love with If by Rudyard Kipling. And, I'm talking high school. And then, 15, 20 years later, something like that, I don't remember exactly when we started, that poem, I was going through a really tough time. And that poem just came into my head one day as I was driving home from work. And if you're familiar with that work, he's talking about you're going to face adversities in life. And it's all about, striving and pushing forward and overcoming odds. And it was so encouraging to me. And I thought, you know what, I've got to do a reading of that poem. And then the more I mulled it over, the more I thought, you know what, let's take it to the next level. Let's add some music and some sound effects. And that was how Verses in Vox was born.
That's great. I love that. Yeah. So thank you very much for spending some time with us. I'll have the links and stuff in the show notes. And man, JD, thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Good deal. Well, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to The Cultured Bumpkin, a literature podcast with Jake Phillips. Thank you very much for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this, would you mind going and subscribing and leaving a nice review on whatever podcast platform you heard this on? I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.